"Step aside, soldier. Nobody's watching tonight." The man said it to my face in a dark so thick I could not see my own white glove, and he said it the way a man says a thing he believes is already done. I felt his breath before I heard the words. He had come up the steps of the treasury close enough to put his hand flat on the bronze door behind me, close enough that I could smell the rain on his coat and the oil he had wiped on his hands, and he leaned in with all the easy weight of a man who has decided that the world has, for one night, gone blind on his behalf. I will tell you what I was thinking behind a face he could not even see. I was thinking, he is right that nobody is watching. He is wrong about what that means. My name is Corwin Aldous Reeve, and on the night the whole of Carrow City went dark I was the sentry on the lower door of the royal treasury of the House of Westerholt, a long, cold building of grey stone and iron, set into the hill below the upper palace, where the kingdom kept what could not be replaced. Not only gold, though there was gold. The old regalia, the deeds, the seals of office, the records of every pension paid to every soldier's widow in the realm. People think a treasury is money. It is mostly memory. It is the thing a country cannot get back if it is taken in the night. I had stood that door for 2 years by then, and I could have walked its forecourt blind. As it turned out, that was the whole of the test. It began at 9:20, on an autumn evening with a storm sitting low over the river. I remember the exact minute because the great clock in the Treasury Tower struck the quarter, and on the third stroke the city went out. Not a flicker, not a stutter. The whole skyline simply stopped existing. The river of lamps along the embankment, the gold windows of the upper palace, the red signal on the bridge gone, all at once, as if a hand had closed over the city like a man cupping a candle. For one breath there was nothing at all, a black so total it pressed on the eyes, and then the storm gave a low roll of thunder as if it had done the thing itself and was pleased. I did not move. A guard does not move because the lights go out. The lights are not his post. The door is his post. But I will not pretend my heart did not climb. I had stood night watches through rain and through frost, and through the long dead hours when the body wants nothing but to sit down. I had never stood one in a dark like that. It took the building from me. The forecourt I knew stone by stone became a rumor. The river I could always hear became the only thing left in the world, that and my own breathing and the cold weight of the rifle in my arms. Then far off, the sound began that I have never forgotten, the sound of a city understanding, all at once, that no one was coming. It started as a single car horn, surprised, then 2, then 100, a great rising bray of horns from the dark streets where every signal had died at once. Glass somewhere. A woman's voice calling a name. The deep, ugly murmur of a great many people in the dark all deciding in the same minute that the rules had gone out with the lamps. I had heard crowds before. I had never heard a crowd turn. There is a note it hits, a low animal note that a man does not forget once he has heard it. I tightened my grip and I held my line and I told myself what my first sergeant had told me on my first night, years before, in a voice like a closing door. The dark is not your enemy, son. The dark is just the room with the candle out. You are the same man in it that you were before. I would need that. I did not yet know how much. For the better part of an hour, nothing came up my steps. The relief did not come either. I learned later the whole watch rotation had broken when the power failed. Men scattered across a darkened palace trying to find one another by voice. And so I stood my door alone, longer than any man is meant to, while below me the city tore at itself in the black. I heard them before I saw them. You always do in the dark, a scrape of boots on the lower steps. Low voices, careful, the voices of men who know they should be quiet and are enjoying that they no longer have to be very. The chink of metal, and then a thin needle of light came up the steps ahead of them, swinging, a single storm lantern, shuttered low, and behind it the shapes of men. 4 of them, then I saw it was 5. They came up out of the dark into the small, failing circle of their own lamp, and the one in front lifted the lantern and found me with it, and stopped. For a moment we simply looked at each other across the light. He was a broad man, well past 40, in a good coat gone wet at the shoulders, with a heavy, clean-shaven face and the kind of eyes that have spent a life measuring rooms, not for beauty, for exits, for what could be carried out of them. He had a crowbar resting easy along his forearm the way a gentleman carries a cane. Behind him his men carried sacks and tools, and one of them a long iron pry that 2 men would need. They had not come to a dark city to wander it. They had come for this door. He looked me up and down in his own lamplight, the red of my tunic gone black in it, the brass of my buttons throwing back small, dull coins of light, the bearskin making me a head taller than any of them. And he smiled, not cruelly, almost kindly. The way you smile at a child standing in a doorway he doesn't understand is about to be moved. "Well," he said, "look at this. They left the toy out in the rain." His men laughed, the quick, obedient laugh of men who laugh when the chief laughs. I gave him nothing. I had learned by then the great secret of my trade, which is that a still face is not an empty one. Behind it I was already counting. 5 men, 1 lantern. The crowbar in his right hand, the long pry behind, the door at my back with its 3 bolts that ran a hand's length into the stone, and the bell pull beside the hinge that I had already, in the first dark minute, found with my fingers and would not let go of for anything in the world. I marked the tools as he came, the way a man marks the weather before a long march. The crowbar was honest iron, scarred at the claw from 100 prized doors. The long pry behind was the serious thing, a tool that says a crew has done this before and knows that a treasury door is not opened by strength but by leverage and patience, and that they had brought both. 1 man carried a coil of waxed cord and a small bullseye lantern shuttered down to a coin of light. Another had the sacks folded under his arm, empty and ready, and the carelessness of those empty sacks told me more about the chief than anything he said. He had not come to try the door. He had come certain it would open, and brought the sacks to carry out what he had already in his mind taken. A man who packs for a thing has stopped imagining it might fail. That was the crack in him, though I could not have named it then. I only knew, watching the empty sacks swing, that he believed the night was already over and won, and that a man who believes a fight is one has stopped fighting it, and a man who has stopped fighting can be outlasted. He came up the last 2 steps until he stood square in front of me, near enough that the lantern lit us both, and he set his hand flat on the bronze of the door beside my shoulder, claiming it, and he said the thing I began with. "Step aside, soldier, nobody's watching tonight." And there it was, the whole of his mistake, said out loud in the dark, with 5 men at his back and a city screaming below us and not a light in the world. He believed the dark was a thing that had happened for him. He believed that a man only does right when a light is on him to see it done. He had built, I would learn, a whole life on that single idea, that conscience is a kind of audience, and that a man with the lights off has neither. He was about to find out, on my doorstep, that he had the thing exactly backward. "This is the one night in 10 years, he said, almost gently leaning closer, "that nobody in this whole rotten city can see what any man does. You understand me? No watchmen, no lamps, no little book to write your name in. Tomorrow the lights come up and it's all just gone and there's no one to say who or how. So I'm going to make this very easy for you because you seem like a sensible lad under all that fur." He tapped the door once with 2 fingers. "Step aside." I did not. I want to be honest about what that costs, because the stories people tell about us make it sound like nothing. They say he never moved as if not moving were an absence, a sort of sleep. It is not. Not moving, when a thing is coming at you, is the hardest work a body can do. Every muscle in me wanted to do something, to step back, to step in, to speak, to grip the bell and ring it. Anything to break the terrible weight of being a single still man in front of 5 moving ones. Standing still under that is like holding a great stone over your own head and being told the only safe thing to do is keep holding it. The man who looks calm is not calm. He is a furnace with the door shut. So I held the stone. I kept my eyes on a point past his shoulder, on a notch in the gatehouse stone I knew was there even though I could not see it. The trick my sergeant taught me: find a thing that doesn't care about you and look at it. And I let the man's words break over me and run off like the rain off the bronze. He waited. When a thing he expected did not happen, I watched it bother him, the first small crack in his certainty. He had thought the dark would be enough. He had thought that a man unwatched would slide. He tilted his head. "Deaf," he said. "He's not deaf," said one of the men behind him, the young one, nervous, his voice climbing. "Look at his eyes. He heard you." "Then he's stupid," the chief said. But he said it without heat, studying me now, recalculating. He was, I would learn, a thinking man, which made him more dangerous than a brute and in the end, easier to undo. A brute would have swung the bar. This man wanted me to choose to move, because a man who chooses to move can be trusted to stay moved, and a man you have to knock down may get up. He wanted my consent. He thought he was buying time. He did not know he was giving me all I needed. "All right," he said, and his voice changed, warmer, a salesman's voice, a voice that had closed 1,000 deals in back rooms. "Let's be men about it. I respect a man who stands his ground, I do. But you and I both know what's behind that door, and we both know what you're paid to stand here, and it isn't a tenth of what's in that room, is it? It isn't 100th. He let that sit. "I'm not a thief, son. I'm a redistributor. There's enough behind there to keep a regiment of guardsmen for a generation, all of it just sitting, doing nothing for anyone while you stand out here in the wet on a wage your kingdom rounds down. So here's my offer, and it's a real one." The lantern came up a little, lighting his face. "Step aside, walk down those steps, go home, and tomorrow you find a purse on your bed that you couldn't earn in 10 years. Nobody saw you take it. Nobody saw you leave. The dark gave it to you. All you have to do is let it. I will tell you so you don't think me a stone, there is a part of every man that hears an offer like that. Not the offer of the money, the offer of no one will ever know. That is the real poison, and he poured it slow. 2 years of cold doors. A wage rounded down. A door no one would even know I had left. For a fraction of a second I felt the old human pull of it, the whisper that says who would it even hurt, and in that fraction I understood the man completely, because that whisper was the whole of his religion. He had simply never said no to it. He had built a life of saying yes in the dark and walking back into the light clean, and he had come to believe that everyone else was only pretending not to. I thought of the records inside, not the gold. The records, the pension rolls. Somewhere on a shelf behind me was a widow's name I would never know, and the proof in ink that her country owed her something every month for the rest of her life because her husband had not stepped aside either. If that book burned or vanished into a sack on a dark night, she did not lose money. She lost the only thing that said her loss had been real. You cannot put a purse on that. So the whisper came, and I let it come, and I let it go, the way you let a wave wash to your boots and back out without following it. And I gave him my answer, which was the same answer I had given to the wind and the rain for 2 years. Nothing at all. He waited again, and again the thing he wanted did not come, and I watched the patience curdle in him by degrees. He tried a new tack, the one such men always try last when the purse has failed, because it is the one they believe in most. He tried to make me doubt that anyone would ever care. "Let me tell you how tomorrow goes," he said, and he came in close again, confiding, almost gentle, the lantern lighting the underside of his jaw. "Tomorrow the lights come up and this city is a wreck. Every shop on the river's been opened. Every till's been emptied. There'll be 1,000 wrongs for the watch to chase and not enough men to chase a tenth of them. And your masters up the hill will be counting their own losses and thanking God the gold's still locked. And not one of them, not one, son, will spend a single thought on how it stayed locked, or on the man who stood here in the wet while the world fell down. You'll get no medal. You'll get no purse. You'll get a fresh pair of boots and the same door tomorrow night. Whereas I am offering you, right now, in the only hour it's ever going to be offered, a way out of all of it. Nobody up that hill will ever know what you did down here in the dark. That cuts both ways, soldier. Nobody will know if you held, and nobody will know if you didn't. It was, I will grant him, the cleverest thing said to me that night because it was half true. No one did spend much thought after on how the gold stayed locked. The papers wanted the loud part, and the loud part came later by accident. The holding itself, the hours of it, the cold and the doubt, no one was there to see, and that is the lot of every man who stands a door. The chief had found the soft place under the discipline and pressed his thumb into it. But he had mistaken the soft place for the load-bearing one. A man who needs to be seen to do right is a man who will, sooner or later, do wrong where he is not seen, and that man is no use on a door at all. The whole point of me, the entire reason a kingdom puts a still man in front of the thing it cannot lose, is that I am the same man whether anyone is looking or not. He was offering to free me from the one thing that made me worth standing there. I would as soon have handed him the bolts. The warmth went out of his voice like a lamp turned down. "You think I'm playing," he said. He stepped back and made a small motion with 2 fingers, and the man with the long pry came up beside him, and another set down his sack and took something from it that caught the lantern with a hard, short shine, and I understood we had reached the part of the night where reasonable men stop reasoning. The young nervous one hung back. The other 3 came up into the light. "Last time, and I'll say it kindly," the chief said. "There are 5 of us and 1 of you, and not a soul in this city to hear a thing. The bolts on that door I can have open in 4 minutes once you're not standing on them. Now I would rather not put a single mark on the king's pretty soldier, because that's a fuss I don't need, but understand me, you are a fence post to me. You are a fence post that talks. I will move you the easy way or I will move you the other way, and the dark doesn't care which, and tomorrow neither will anyone else." He spread his hands. "Be a fence post that walks home. Step aside." Here is the thing he did not know, and it is the hinge of the whole night, so I will set it down plainly. He thought the dark hid him, it hid me. He had a lantern, I did not. And a lantern in a great dark is not a gift, it is a leash and a target. It lit him from the chin, it lit his men. It lit the crowbar and the pry and the hard short shine of the thing the 3rd man had taken from his sack, and it lit every step they took and every face they made, and it threw all of it, clear as a printed page, onto the one set of eyes in that forecourt that was not behind the light but in front of it. Mine. I stood in the black with the door at my back, and I could not see my own glove, but I could see them, every one of them, lit by their own lamp, naming themselves to me one careless face at a time. The young one's fear, the chief's clean jaw, the 3rd man missing the top of a finger on his left hand, the 4th with a scar through his eyebrow that the lamp made a small white road. I had nothing to write with and nowhere to write, so I wrote it where it could not be stolen. I put each face in the place inside a man where he keeps the things he means to remember, and I held the bell pull, and I held the stone over my head, and I waited. A guard's whole art is the difference between cannot and will not. He thought I could not stop him. He was right. 1 man does not stop 5 with his hands, but he did not understand that I was not there to stop him. I was there to hold the door long enough and to hold the dark's own evidence long enough that the night would do to him what one cold soldier never could. And below us, faint under the storm, a new sound had begun that the chief, for all his measuring, had not yet heard. It was the bell. Not a great bell. I had no great bell. The bell pull at my hinge ran up the inside of the wall to a small brass alarm in the gatehouse, the kind a man could mistake, in a storm, for a buoy on the river. I had been ringing it since the first scrape of their boots on the lower steps. A single steady pull, release, pull, release, the old watch signal 100 years older than I was, that any man of the house who heard it would know meant the treasury door and come. I had rung it through the whole of the chief's speeches, through the offer of the purse, through be a fence post that walks home, my hand moving so small at my side that none of them in their own lantern glare had seen it. The dark hid me. I told you it would. But a bell needs a man to hear it, and on a night when the whole watch had scattered, I did not know if a man would. So I had done the only other thing a guard can do, which is to make the moment last. Every second the chief spent talking was a second the door stayed shut, so I let him talk. I gave him nothing to push against, no insult to answer, no fear to feed on, no movement to read, and a man like that, denied a reaction, talks longer. The way water poured at a wall runs sideways looking for a crack. I had turned his own patience into my reinforcement. He thought he was being merciful. He was being slow. And slow that night was the only weapon I had. He found out about the bell when the young nervous one cocked his head. "You hear that?" the young one said. "It's the river," the chief said, not turning. "It's not the river. It's a bell. It's coming from the wall. He's been." The young one's lantern-lit face went stupid with understanding, and he looked at my hand at the hinge, and his voice cracked clean up the middle. "He's rung something. He's been ringing it the whole time. We've been standing here in his lamp letting him count us." For one beautiful instant nobody moved at all. The chief turned his measuring eyes from his man to me, and I watched the arithmetic run behind them, and I watched him arrive late, far too late, at the sum I had reached an hour before, that the dark was not his ally. That a man with a lantern in a black city is a lit stage, and every face in that stage's glow had been read and remembered by the one watcher he could not see. That the night he had counted on to erase him had instead been quietly, patiently, writing him down. He did the thing a proud man always does when he learns he has been wrong from the start. He got angry, and he stopped thinking, and he reached for the door. "Enough," he said, and he set his shoulder past me and got his crowbar to the seam of the bronze, and the long pry came up over his man's shoulder toward the lower bolt. And the third man moved on my flank with the hard, short thing in his hand, and the whole patient night broke at once into 4 seconds I have lived through 10,000 times since. I did not brawl. I want that understood, because the tale grew in the telling, and by spring they had me throwing men down the steps like a hero in a penny paper, and it was not so. A guard's hands are the last thing he uses and the smallest. I did exactly 3 things, and I did them in the dark by feel, because I had stood that door 2 years and my hands knew it the way your hands know your own house in the night. First, I rang the bell hard, no more secret now. 3 great pulls, the alarm signal, come now, come running and let it go. Second, when the crowbar bit at the seam, I did not pull the chief away from the door. I put myself into the door. I stepped my back flat against the bronze and dropped my weight into my heels and became, with the whole of my training and my body, the one thing he had called me at the start, a fence post, an immovable thing in a doorway. He could pry at the seam all he liked. He could not pry at a seam that a 200-pound man was standing sealed against, not in 4 minutes, not in 40, not with me there. I gave up every inch of pride and took up the 1 inch of stone behind me, and I held it the way I had held the cold for 2 years, and his bar shrieked off the bronze and found nothing. Third, and this is the only time I touched a man that night, when the third one came at my flank with the short bright thing, swinging it up toward where a man's head ought to be, I brought the rifle across, flat, the wood of it, not the point, a single hard sweep that took the thing out of his hand and sent it skittering away across the dark forecourt where none of them could find it again. And I came back to the door and sealed it with my spine, and did not follow him into the dark to do more. A guard does not chase. A guard holds. The chasing is for other men, and as it happened, other men were already on the steps. Because the bell had been heard. It had been heard by one man, and one man that night was enough to begin it. Old Sergeant Maddock of the Inner Watch, who had been feeling his way along the colonnade above for the better part of an hour trying to gather his scattered men by voice, heard the brass over the storm and knew it for what it was before the second pull had finished, and he did not wait to gather anyone. He came down the dark stair at a run he had no business running at his age, one hand on the rail and one on the wall, calling the rally cry into the black as he came so that any guardsman within the sound of it would turn and follow. And they did, 2 of them, then a 4th, men who had been lost in the dark of a dead palace and now had a sound to run toward. That is the whole secret of why we drill a signal into a man until he could ring it in his sleep. So that on the one night the lights go out and every other thing fails, the dark still carries the one note that means a brother needs you, and a brother comes. The chief heard the boots on the steps below and the old sergeant's voice above, and he understood that his quiet, private, unwitnessed crime had filled up, in the space of a minute, with witnesses. "Out," he said to his men. "Down, now. Leave the—" But it was already coming apart in his hands the way these things do, his men grabbing for sacks and dropping them, the young one already 2 steps down and going, the lanterns swinging wild and throwing their panic in great lurching shapes across the stone. They went down into the dark the way they had come up out of it, and for one bad moment I thought the dark would do for them exactly what the chief had promised: swallow them, erase them, hand them back to a city too busy with its own collapse to want them. It very nearly did. But there were a few seconds first, and I have never told anyone this, because it does not flatter me, and a man should be careful which parts of a story he polishes. When I stood alone in the dark with the door at my back, and the chief's lantern dropping down the steps and the rally still only a sound far above me, and I did not know if anyone was truly coming. For those few seconds I was a single man sealed against a bronze door in a black city, my arms gone to water from holding, my ears full of the storm and the screaming below, and a cold thought in me said that the sergeant's voice might be a trick of my own want, that the bell might have rung for no one, that I might stand here until my legs gave, and the chief might simply wait at the bottom of the steps in the dark and come back up when I fell. That is the truth of holding a post. It is not the brave certainty the papers print. It is keeping your spine flat to the door for one more second when every part of you has run out of reasons, and then one more after that, on nothing but the habit of the thing, until the reason arrives on its own boots out of the black. Mine arrived. Not every man's does. I have never forgotten the few seconds in which I did not know. Old Maddock got to me breathing like a forge and gripped my shoulder hard and said, "Are you holding?" And I said, "I'm holding, Sergeant." And that was the whole of our conversation, because there was nothing else worth saying and we both knew it. We did not chase them into the dark. I told you a guard holds. We sealed the door, the 4 of us, and we stood it together, and we let the night go on screaming below us, and I will tell you that I believed in that hour that the chief had won the only thing he truly wanted, which was to vanish. The gold was safe. The records were safe. But the man who had stood on my steps and told me that conscience was just an audience, and the dark had let him off, that man, I thought, had walked clean back into the black he believed in, and would wake the next day in a warm room having lost nothing but a night. I was wrong, and the manner of my being wrong is the part of this I have turned over the most in the years since, because it is the whole meaning of the thing. The lights came back at 20 minutes to 4. They did not come all at once the way they had gone. They came in a slow gray tied up the river first, a few windows, then a street, then the embankment lamps stuttering and catching one by one like a line of men coming to attention, and last of all the great gold face of the upper palace swimming up out of the dark as if the hill itself were surfacing. The city, which had spent 6 hours as a black animal, became a city again. And as the light came up, it came up on everything the dark had been hiding, on overturned barrows and broken glass, and 100 small wrongs done by 100 men who had each believed, like the chief, that the dark was a door they could walk through and out the other side clean. But the dark is not a door. The dark is a delay. Everything done in it is still done. It is only waiting for the light to be seen. That is the thing the chief had built his whole life not understanding, and it was about to be taught to him on a scale he could not have imagined. For when the law came back into the streets with the light, and it came back hard and fast and angry, it did not have to find the men who had been at my door. It had me. I had stood in the dark in front of a lantern for the better part of an hour, and I had used every minute of it. When the inquiry sat the next morning, and a tired magistrate with ink on his cuff asked me what I could tell him of the men who had attempted the royal treasury during the failure of the lights, I did not say it was dark, sir. I saw nothing. I gave him the chief's clean, broad face and his measuring eyes and the good wet coat. I gave him the third man's left hand with the top of a finger gone. I gave him the fourth man's scar like a small white road through the eyebrow. I gave him the young one's voice cracking up the middle and the very words he had said. He's been ringing it the whole time. He's been counting us. And I gave him the short bright thing I had swept across the forecourt, which the morning watch had found in daylight lying against the far wall where no man fleeing in the dark had been able to retrieve it, and which had a maker's mark on the haft that the magistrate's clerk knew at a glance. The dark the chief had trusted had not hidden a single one of them from me. It had lit them like a stage and put them, one careless face at a time, into the one place they could never break into and never carry off, the memory of the man they had told to step aside. They had the third man by noon, a surgeon's apprentice 3 streets from the river, asked to dress a hand bruised black where a rifle stock had crossed it, looked at the half finger and at the morning's notice and sent a boy for a constable. The fourth man, the one with the scar, was known already. A man with a scar like a road is not built for hidden work, and there were those who had wondered for years where his money came from. The young one was not built for it at all. He walked into a watch house of his own accord before the second day was out, gray and sleepless, and said he wanted to tell someone the truth before it was told to him, which is the closest thing to courage a frightened man can manage. And the magistrate, who was not a cruel one, marked it down in his favor. But the chief they could not place, because the chief had been careful for 30 years, and a careful man leaves no half finger and no scar and walks into no watch house. He had a name in the better part of the city and another in the worse, and he had a coat of respectability cut as well as the wet one he had worn to my door, and the description of a broad, clean-shaven man past 40 with measuring eyes fit 1,000 men who had done nothing at all. For a week it seemed he had won after all, that the one who had planned it, who had spoken the words, who had set his hand flat on the king's bronze and called conscience an audience, would be the only one the dark kept. I will tell you how he was found, because it is the whole point, and because I did not do it, and a guard ought to be honest about what was his work and what was not. He was found by his own certainty. When the 3 lesser men were taken, and the city's papers carried the story of the soldier who had held the treasury door blind through the night of the blackout, the chief could not leave it alone. A man who has built his life on the idea that no one is ever really watching cannot bear to be the man who got away because someone was. It offended the religion of his whole life. So he did the thing such men do. He went quietly in a good coat to the public gallery of the inquiry to watch, to see for himself what the soldier had given them, to measure the room as he had always measured rooms, and judge his own safety in it. He sat at the back among the curious, and he listened to the clerk read out the descriptions I had given, and he heard his own clean jaw and his own measuring eyes described from the witness chair by a man in a red tunic, and somewhere in him, I think, the old confidence told him he was still invisible, still the watcher and never the watched, because that is what it had always told him, and it had never once been wrong. I was on the stand when he came in. I had not expected to know him. I had seen him for less than an hour in lantern light weeks before, but I had not seen him with my eyes that night. I had written him, the way you write a thing you mean never to lose, and when the door at the back of the hall opened and a broad man past 40 came in out of the daylight and took a seat at the rear and folded his hands and tilted his head to listen, something in the angle of that head, that small habit of a man measuring a room, went through me like the bell. I did not point. I did not shout. A guard does not make the arrest. That is for other men, and there is a discipline in waiting for them too. I finished my answer to the magistrate, and then I said evenly, "Sir, the man who spoke to me at the door, who offered me the purse and called me a fence post, and set his hand on the king's door, is sitting at the back of this hall. The gentleman in the gray coat with his hands folded. I would know the set of his head in any light, sir, because that is the one thing I had of him in the dark, and I have kept it. You could have heard the river through the windows. For a moment he did not understand that I meant him. The mind of a man who has never been caught does not have the door in it that lets the knowledge in. It has to be broken open. I watched him wait for the room to laugh, to dismiss the soldier's mistake, to turn back to its business, and I watched the room not do it. I watched the clerk's pen stop. I watched the magistrate lift his head slow as a turning gun. And I watched the chief feel, for the first time in 30 careful years, the simple, unbearable weight of being looked at by people who have decided to keep looking. He stood too late, much too late, and for one instant the measuring eyes swept the room for an exit, the old reflex of a lifetime, and found constables already moving down both aisles toward him, and found the gallery on its feet, and found 100 faces turned to him in the broad, flat, honest light of a winter morning, every one of them watching, every one of them seeing, the exact thing he had spent his whole life arranging never to feel. And I watched the thing I have only ever seen on 1 or 2 faces in all my years. I watched a man's entire idea of the world die behind his eyes while he was still standing in it. He did not fight. There was nothing left in him to fight with. They put him between 2 constables, and the magistrate, an unhurried man, let the silence sit a moment before he spoke, and then he said the only thing in that whole long business that I have set down word for word, because it was better than anything I could have said, and it was not said by me. You believed, the magistrate said to him, that the dark excused you. It is a common faith and a false one. The dark hides nothing, sir. It only postpones the seeing. And you had the great misfortune to do your work in front of the one man in this city whose entire profession is to keep seeing when the lights go out. The chief said nothing. There was nothing for him to say. He had built an empire of words for back rooms, and there was not one of them that worked in the light. They took him down, and that was the last I saw of his face. Though not the last I heard of him, he was tried and convicted on the testimony of a half finger and a scar and a young man's conscience, and the set of a head in lantern light, and he went where such men go, and the regalia and the deeds and the pension rolls and the widow's name I will never know all stayed exactly where they had been, on their shelves, in the dark safe. There is a part of this that the papers got, and a part they did not, and it is the second part I have kept. The papers got the door held blind through the night of the blackout, and they got the bell rung in secret, and they got the 4 seconds at the seam, and they made of it a fine loud thing with my name spelled wrong in 2 places, and old Maddock cut it out and pinned it in the guardroom and called me a celebrity until I could have walked into the river. They got the karma of it, the proud man brought low, the dark he trusted turning him in, the certainty that betrayed him. People love that, and they should. There is justice in it, and justice is good for the heart. But the loud part was never the true part. The true part was quiet, and it happened weeks later, and almost no one saw it, which is the only way the true part of anything ever happens. A man came to the lower door one gray afternoon when I was back on it, the storm long gone, the city all lit and ordinary again. An older man, plainly dressed, who stood at the foot of the steps a while as if deciding, and then came up and took off his hat. I did not know him. He said he had read the business in the papers, and he said that his late brother's name was on a pension roll in the building behind me, that his brother had died in service and left a widow, and that the small, steady sum that came to her each month was the only thing in the world that said the country remembered her husband had given it everything. And he had read, he said, that the records had been the thing those men might have carried off into the dark and burned or sold or simply lost. And he had come, he said, because he wanted one man to know that it was not just gold I had stood in front of that night. You held a door, he said, but you'll forgive an old man, you held more than a door. Then he put his hat back on and went down the steps and away into the lit and ordinary street, and I never saw him again, and I never learned his name or his brother's, and I have thought of him at least once on every night watch I have stood since. Because that is the thing the chief never understood, and the thing his whole easy life had been built on not understanding. He thought a man does right only when a light is on him. He thought conscience was an audience, and the dark a kind of permission, and a watched man and an unwatched man two different creatures. And the truth I had from a hard old sergeant on my first cold night and proved on the worst one, is the exact reverse. The watched man is not the honest one. Any man is honest with a light in his face. The honest man is the one who is the same in the dark as in the day, who holds the door when no lamp shows him doing it, who rings the bell when no one may come, who keeps seeing when the lights go out, not because anyone is watching, but because he is, and a man cannot ever step aside from himself. The chief came to my door, believing the dark hid him. It is the saddest sentence I know to say of a man, and I say it without any pleasure now that the years have taken the heat out of it. The dark hid nothing. It only waited. It held what he did, patient and exact, the way I held the door, until the light came up and showed it all, his face, his crime, and the small terrible truth he had run from his whole life, which was that there had been a watcher in that black forecourt the entire time. It was him. I stood the lower door of the royal treasury of the House of Westerholt for 11 more years, through more storms and one more failure of the lights, and I never once told the new men the loud version. I told them the quiet one. I told them the dark is just the room with the candle out, and they are the same men in it that they were before, or they had better be, because the dark does not forgive and it does not forget. It only keeps the lamp turned down on what they do, and hands it, every bit of it, to the morning. That is the whole of it. A guard holds the door, and on the night the city went black and a proud man came up my steps certain that no one in all the world could see, I held it, and I saw, and in the end so did everyone, because the one thing the dark can never hide from a man is himself.